It's great to see y'all. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be back. As Amanda said, my name is Tom Strong. I am the Director of Employer Activation at an organization called the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. And what my title means really simply is that I lead the programs that we have that are really focused on employer practice change, on trying to help employers kind of understand why and how they can be champions for thriving workplaces and for their own workers and for the communities where their workers live. And I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm Carrie Felton. I'm the Director of Worker Success at the National Fund. And so I work very closely with Tom and his team and the projects that he leads. My team also leads some projects that are focused on equitable pathways to education and training and career pathways and career opportunities. And so that has a lot of different things to it. And I'm in Chicago, Illinois, where there is currently several inches of snow on the ground for you all California folks. And I'll just really quickly share a little bit about the National Fund and who we are. So we are committed to advancing workforce equity. And we believe that in order to do that, we have to move toward these three big, hairy, audacious goals, is what we call them internally. So race does not dictate employment outcomes. All jobs are good jobs. All workers have resources required to thrive. So these are very resonant and kind of overlap and connect and align with what I heard Amanda sharing around the High Roads goals and the goals of this Accelerator Fund. We know that we have about over 30 regional workforce collaboratives that are part of our network. So those are our boots on the ground, our local partners that work with us very closely to innovate and test and spread best practices in their communities. And we get to learn from what they're doing, and we get to support them in their work. Worker voice is a key component essential to advancing each of these BHAGs that we have here, big, hairy, audacious goals. And so we are excited to talk about how that shows up in our work. Let me see if I can. Okay, so why are we here? So first of all, we know everybody in this virtual room. We just shared in our small groups what it feels like when we're not heard, when we don't have input. I shared in my group that the example I gave left me feeling just so powerless. You know, if I have something, if I have a concern, maybe I can talk to my boss, maybe I can't, but at a certain point, if you don't feel like you have any agency over changing things that are wrong in your workplace, it feels like you don't have very many choices. Like you could quit or you could stay in a not good situation. So we all kind of recognize this and kind of resonate that at a very basic level. The folks we're working with in our programs, in our communities, they want to feel valued and have more input. So this is just fundamentally an important topic to be talking about. Second, as Amanda mentioned, our field, the workforce development field, is increasingly, not everybody's there yet, but increasingly acknowledging the need for high road partnerships and approaches that don't just funnel people to any job, but kind of acknowledging our role and the role we have to play and making sure that folks have either the skills they need or the levers to pull to make all jobs good jobs, so that we know that we're placing folks in jobs that are going to meet their needs and also offer opportunities for them. And lastly, deepening our understanding around worker voice. So like there's this fundamental acknowledgement, yes, this is important, but really deepening our understanding of like, how do we do this well? How do we take first steps? What are the best practices? Will really help us meet the needs of both job seekers and workers that we serve, and can really help with our partnerships with businesses and companies that we want to partner with, not just to hire the folks that we work with, but also to start to make changes in their job design and workplaces, so that when we place job seekers and workers there, it will be a better place for them. So that's really going to be the focus of our conversation today. So I'm going to level set a little bit around what we mean at the National Fund when we say worker voice. We developed a definition of worker voice in close partnership with our workforce collaboratives that I mentioned earlier. The full definition you can find on our website. And we acknowledge that meaningful worker voice, what we're kind of aiming toward, will have these 4 components. I'm not going to go through each one of these because we're going to get more into later in our presentation. Tom will talk more about how these show up in the workplace. But the point I want to make at the start of this conversation is that this is more of, worker voice is a continuum. So if you think about your workforce programs and your organization, there's a baseline where you're at in terms of how well you're incorporating your own employee voice into your own organization and participant voice into your programs. So I think we could all kind of reflect on and think about what that looks like in our workforce programs. And then there's always ways to think about, here's where we are, and how can we start to think about increasing or amplifying participant voice or worker voice in our programs or in our workplaces. And so this is a conversation that's about how do we move toward this continuum. And to give an example, sometimes when we talk about worker voice in the workplace, a common example that pops up is employee satisfaction surveys, or sometimes maybe even focus groups might come up. Well, we just need to do a focus group. We just need to do a survey and ask people what they want. And that is that's great. That's a great first start. It's a way to start to, if you have no data on what your employees are experiencing or what your program participants are experiencing and what they need, that's a really valuable endeavor. We are going to talk about how surveys or focus groups alone are not going to be able to get us to a place where we've reached these 4 elements: representation, empowerment, agency, and value, to a point where your workers or your program participants really feel like they have some agency to change things that aren't working for them. So I will pause there, and I have this little note in the bottom corner about, is worker voice the same as worker power, worker organizing, worker rights? So I want to say just a word about, at the National Fund, we believe that to amplify or increase worker voice, there are a wide range of strategies that we could employ to do this. Everything from, traditional labor organizing and unions, supporting worker centers, sector kind of strategies around how do we bring our sector together to improve, set standards for workers as a sector. What's the other one I had on the tip of my tongue? I lost it, but there are a lot of different ways that we can start. Increasing education about worker rights, workforce development. There's some examples of folks who are saying like, we can teach our job seekers and workers about worker rights. So there's a lot of different approaches. And I just kind of wanted to be clear that today what we're talking about is working with our employer and partners around how do we help them understand, how to better understand what their workers need in terms of kind of employers voluntarily saying, I would like to improve jobs in my workplace. How can I start to do that? And what does worker voice get us? So we are going to talk about this later, but I wanted to just pause and ask you all, like, if you reflect on, there's a lot of benefits for our participants in our workforce and training programs. You can think about the more we integrate what they want, their experiences, their needs, the better our outcomes can be. The National Fund, kind of separate to this conversation, we have a whole project that we're about to launch that's around how do you start to, as a workforce education and training program, like start to center, workers' needs in your programs. As employees in the workplace, what can you gain by increasing worker voice? And for employers, what are the benefits? So we're going to get into that in just a minute. And I'm actually going to toss it to Tom in just a second. And he's going to talk through, worker voice shows up as a core pillar in our job design framework. So kind of our framework for what are the things you need to have a quality job. So there's a whole pillar that's about worker voice that we'll talk about in a minute. And ensuring empowerment, voice, and choice is also one of 6 principles for trauma-informed organizations. So if that's something that you've heard about before, trauma-informed resilience building practices and workforce development, empowerment, voice, and choice is also a really key element or foundational element in creating trauma-informed practices. So with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Tom.
Thanks, Carrie. So I'm going to come back in a second to the question Carrie raised specifically about what worker voice means to and how it can be of value to employers. But in the meantime, I want to think you all to think about this question in the chat. So for those of you who do work with employer partners directly, in what ways does this issue of employee or worker voice come up? Are some employers that you work with thinking about this as a priority for them? We would be really interested to know your perspective here. So please feel free to share in the chat as I speak. So as Carrie mentioned, worker voice is something that we have incorporated in the last 2 years into our job design framework, which is the tool that we use the most with employers and with our workforce partners to help them understand like how we think about good jobs and job quality, and how we think about improving what it means to have a healthy and equitable and inclusive workplace. And when Carrie's team was doing the work on that definition of worker voice she shared a few minutes ago, our team at the national team was like, holy hell, we have this definition of job quality that we've relied on for years and we don't have anything to represent worker voice in it. And we realized this was something we had to incorporate into the job design framework, and we redesigned our own framework in order to prioritize that. The framework itself is really built into pillars. There's the kind of the external frame, which is all about racial equity and inclusion and how that is an essential lens for looking at job quality. And within that, we think about job quality as having to do with core areas of what means a good job, the compensation, supervision quality, and so on and so forth. What are the support systems that help people overcome barriers to work and thrive at the workplace? How do you offer people opportunities and career ladders within the workplace? And how do you empower people, engage people, and offer them agency within the workplace? And we see this tool as kind of key to how we have conversations with employers, which is part of why I wanted to share it with you. And increasingly, we're talking with our own employer partners about that last column, about the voice column. And similar to the graphic Carrie just shared on the next slide, this is how we think about voice within the workplace itself. And as Carrie said, like the first thing is you have to have engagement. It is the very tip of the iceberg. And it's easy to kind of just, do surveys, do focus groups, and not do anything with it. And then that really becomes not very valuable at all. But for employers to really devote themselves and kind of learn about worker voice, they first have to open up the channel so that they can hear what their employees are saying. There are steps beyond that, however, that we recommend to folks. And one of the main ones is giving people the chance to improve their workplace. And that happens through the lens of worker voice. In a Gallup poll from a few years ago, they found that only 48% of workers are satisfied with their ability to change their own workplace, but almost 80% see that as critical for a good job. And so this ability to engage in continuous improvement and to be empowered in changing the workplace is something we see as very important. And finally, there's participation. Worker voice can express itself by workers actually being co-creators of the workplace. And that can take the form of participatory management, where you have a flatter hierarchy, you have autonomous teams, where people work together and understand their own metrics and are able to work as teams to achieve them. Can it happen through formal representation on the job, or it can happen by actually sharing ownership with the people who work in a business. All of these are ways that worker voice can be moved within a business, and we think all of them are helpful to employers, especially in the kind of economy that we're facing right now. So the big question that I want to address is, why should employers care about worker voice? And to frame that, I want you all to think about the economy that we're currently living in. We're now in the second year of a historically tight labor market. And while there's a lot of predictions that this is going to change and it will not remain like this, I think there's a lot of demographic reasons why we can expect the current status to continue even if there is a recession. And for very basic reasons, what this tight labor market has accomplished is it has given workers more opportunities to express their voice, sometimes with their feet. The data you're looking at here comes from our evaluation partner at the Workforce and Organizational Research Center, and they took the Department of Labor's JOLTS report that looks at job openings and people leaving their job. And what they simply did was look at each sector and compare how many people are quitting this month versus how many job openings are there this month. And is there a ratio for that? So they went ahead and just started comparing that through a ratio, which is on the next slide. And what they found is that there are certain industries that tend to be those that are characterized by what we think of as low quality jobs, low wage, poor control over your hours or your schedule, poor benefits and what have you. And those jobs, of course, are the ones that people are exiting the fastest. 60% of all retail jobs this past July, all job openings occurred because someone left that job. Means that there's a huge portion of new jobs that aren't occurring because your business is growing. They're occurring because you can't keep people working for you. And we know that employers are experiencing this very viscerally right now. They are burnt out, their employees are burnt out. It is a huge source of pressure and pain in their workplace to try to address this. But it gives an opportunity for those of us who are working with them in the workforce development system to really get them thinking about what are the core reasons that they are struggling and how can they actually address that, not just through another training or recruitment plan, but actually through looking at the core factors that affect people's experience in their workplace. And we've seen examples from our network of collaborative workforce funders, workforce collaborators successfully engaging employers on this issue. And I want to share one of those examples with you quickly. So Partner for Work, which I've been doing some work with, is a workforce collaborative based out of the Three Rivers WIB in Pittsburgh. And they were really interested in getting involved in the restaurant industry and building an effective industry partnership there. So last year, they convened a bunch of local restaurants and just asked them, like, what are you struggling with right now? And what they heard was no surprise. They were struggling with burnout. They were struggling with turnover. They were struggling with just keeping their doors open because they couldn't hire enough people. They went to those restaurants afterwards and said, you know, we could survey your employees and potential employees for you and help you understand how to change this dynamic. And actually, the employers didn't really respond at that point. But Partner for Work then did a really clever thing, as they discovered there was a local service industry night where a lot of restaurant workers would go to hang out and network and just see their friends. And they started going there themselves and they would survey employees there, many of whom worked for the restaurants that they had been trying to partner with. They got a really good response on those surveys and took them back to those companies. And that led to 3 new job quality programs, all centered on worker voice issues, with companies that represented over 500 employees. And those projects are continuing to develop as we speak. What really made this possible, though, what kind of made Partner for Work successful in engaging both worker voice and employer concerns was their empathy. They were able to speak the language of both workers in this industry and the employers. They were able to listen to what they were both had to say and able to bring them both together to figure out what solutions could look like. And so what we would like to do next is take you through a similar practice of thinking about what it means to have empathy for both of these groups of stakeholders that you work with. And we're going to use an exercise some of you may have done before. It's called an empathy map, where we simply have you, brainstorm for a few minutes. What are the things this person struggles with? What are causes of pain in their life? What are the things that motivate them? What are the things that they see and hear from the world around them that affect their mentality? And by kind of building that empathy skill, especially with these two groups of stakeholders, we're hoping that's a good place for you to start and think about how you can address worker voice with your employers. So Carrie's going to take us through the first of these, which we're going to use Jamboard for. I think y'all have mostly used this before as a tool. And then and that'll be focused on workers, and I'll take over the employer segment.
So as opposed to having you all try to navigate to Jamboard and type in it as you're also trying to attend to the presentation, we're just going to have you stay right there in Zoom where you are. Look at Amanda sharing her screen so you can see our collective thing here. And so over here in the blue boxes, I'm gonna type in what you all share. So you can share in the chat, and you can come off mute and share. So blue boxes over here will be, what do our job seekers, workers, the folks that we work with, our program participants, what are they hearing? What are they hearing from their friends? What are they hearing from their colleagues? What are they hearing secondhand? The pink boxes are what keeps them up at night? What are their pains, their stressors? What do they think and feel? And then what are their gains? What motivates them to get up in the morning? What do they see? Or over here in the yellow, and then the orange is just other things. So why don't we start over here in these blue boxes? And yeah, if you have something like, what are your job seekers, workers, program participants, what are they hearing? Rethink a career in tech or IT. Emmanuel, is that like you should rethink your career and consider tech, or you want to do tech? I hear you want to do tech. You should rethink that.
I've been hearing like a mix of both. I've been hearing people that like don't invest all your, the metaphorical phrase of don't invest all your eggs in one basket. So if you're considering a career in tech or IT, also have other soft skills or vertical skill set that you can translate into other industries and sectors. Because as we've been seeing over the past couple of months, like these established industry giants are laying off so many people, and these were companies and positions that 5 years ago, if you were to say like, oh yeah, they're going to do all these massive layoffs, people would look at you like you were from another planet and didn't know what you were talking about.
Gotcha. Reputation matters. So the reputation of an employer, I'm assuming, Emily, that's what you meant.
Or maybe of a job seeker too.
Oh, okay. Both X, Y, Z. Okay, those are good. Let's move over to what keeps them up at night? What are some of the things they worry about? I'm going to put burnout under. I don't know if you meant for it to go in the pink, but put it there. Making ends meet. Insecurity. Will I ever be able to retire? Whew.
Ugh.
What is, Maurice, what do you mean by your next mission is to reboot your life and career?
So a lot of transitioning service members are trying to figure out what's next. In fact, the research says that about 2/3 just don't have a vision for the future. And so because we're used to following orders, following the mission, what we teach them is to create their own next mission. So no one's going to tell you anymore. Now you have to learn how to create your own mission and be personally driven.
That's great. I'm going to add that under what do they see, although that might be what they hear too. Okay, so let's move on to, let's do a couple in gains. What motivates them to get up in the morning? What motivates them to keep looking for the job that they want? What motivates our folks? Affirmations, opportunity, to prove one's worth, money. Oh, I love it. being able to bring your whole self to work, specifically your gender, yep, identity and feeling affirmed. Yeah, being accepted as yourself, not having to hide yourself. Collective leadership, development, providing for your family. These are great. Okay, we are going to pause here. Y'all did a great job. We got warmed up. We kind of see how this is going to work. So we're going to do the same thing for our employers. So Amanda, if you could pull up the next empathy map. And I just want to make a couple observations. One, like this felt like things were flowing. You know, we kind of, it says to me like we know our folks, we know our people. We're in part of our job is to listen to them and hear what they're saying, what kind of jobs they want to help them get what they need and achieve their goals. So this feels like it came naturally. And we know what it feels like to capture, like we know what it feels like to listen to our folks. And so that's an experience we can bring into our conversations with our employer partners. So Tom, I'm gonna pass it to you.
Yeah, and so this exercise, because we don't necessarily work with employers as closely as we do with workers, may take a little bit more stretching, but I am confident y'all can do it. What I would encourage you to do is think about this from the perspective of someone you know. So if going back to that original poll Amanda shared, if you or your organization work mostly with small businesses, think of an individual business owner that you know. It may be someone you work with, maybe even be a family member. What keeps them up at night? What are they struggling with? And if you work mostly with large businesses, think of the HR person you work with or your main point of contact. What are the things that stress them out? What are the things that motivate them? Let's start, I know Carrie started with what we hear, but let's start with what pains them. What are the things that keep them up at night? Although there's a great one, okay, no one wants to work. That's definitely something they hear. And yeah, we'll note that one down for sure. So personnel issues absolutely is something that keeps a lot of people up at night. Not having enough employees, being unable to find skilled talent like this, as we discussed earlier, these are things that are real clear pain points for employers right now. Changes in wages and I would say rising minimum wage, you know, in terms of the law, yes, but I would say in terms of the competition, perhaps even more so. There's a lot of employers like having to actually compete on wage for the first time right now. Pain points are going to be different, Amanda, based on the size of the employer. So for those of you working with someone in HR, like where are they feeling pressure, perhaps, from their organization? Some of these are definitely kind of their ability to support the HR needs of the organization. I would also say one that hasn't come up is growth, right? This is still a challenging economy. A lot of companies are struggling to grow despite increasing costs. And that's something that people are going to feel pressure about when they come to you and say, I need 20 CDL drivers by next week. What they're really saying is we've got an opportunity for growth that we can't take advantage of. Funding for training, competition. Okay, this is fabulous. We will keep capturing these, but I also want to shift back to that what do they hear section. So one thing is they hear that nobody wants to work, that there aren't workers who want to join them. I had a contractor say that directly to me this past week, so that's a real thing. What else are they hearing? The challenges of keeping up with a changing economy, changing society. I'll say something a little different because we're focusing on just the pains, but what they hear can be affirmations too, right? A lot of entrepreneurs are told, you are the backbone of the society. You are a job creator. You're a great person doing great things. That is something that they hear. What other messages do they hear or do they see? They have people tell them like, this is a good place to work or it's a bad place to work. A lot of employers are sensitive about the whole word job quality, that phrase, because they feel like it's judging them. I'll say, I think Jovan, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but the can't find thing, that is both a real pain and it's also something that they're hearing, right? That is a message that they're being told there is no one to work. And some are telling them like, please, we want, like, could you be a great place to work? And that also kind of gets to like, what do y'all think are the gains? What are the motivators for business leaders? What helps them get up in the morning? I'll say, speaking as someone who was once a business owner myself, the opportunity to do something great, I think, is a motivator for a lot of business leaders. To create kind of your own legacy, your own, making a difference in the world. Lisa, you mentioned community benefits. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that? either in the chat or, okay, so making a difference, how you impact your community, right? Amanda says like providing a quality in-demand product or service, absolutely. Being the best. Yes, I think that is a huge one for business leaders. Feeling like you are the best at something. Creating or providing value. Money, yes, it is a motivator for workers and is absolutely a motivator for employers too. And money, for employers, it can be on the personal finance level, which many of them are, of course, motivated by that. It's also they internalize more of the organizational finance. I actually added before we started, for smaller companies, especially, making payroll is a huge source of pressure, right? If you are employing people for the first time, you have to make sure they're paid every 2 weeks. That is a huge stressor. And if you don't have cash in the bank, that's coming out of your own bank account. Survival, yes. Keeping your company alive, providing a healthy and engaging workplace. There are a lot of employers who want to create great workplaces, they relish, again, that kind of message of being a job creator, being a trailblazer. This is fabulous. I know we are getting short on time, so let's take one more minute just to think about any other messages that they hear or see. What do they see in the marketplace? What do they see in their environment? And who are they watching? Who are they reading? Where are they getting messages from? Yeah, many don't know how to be a great workplace. I think that's exactly right, Shauna. Is there anything else about where business leaders are getting information? That's kind of what we mean by when we say, what do they see? What are their sources of information? Yeah, so they read a lot of business stuff. They probably watch a lot of business channels too. They hear a lot from their peers. Yes, their peers in the same industry or in related industries. Huge source of information. And the messages that they get are often from them. Some of them are very much on social media. Yeah, absolutely. Some of them are engaged in politics, whether it's at the level of lobbying or just being politically inclined. All right, this has been great. I recognize we're running out of time. We want to make sure y'all have plenty of time for Q&A. What we'll say is that this is just kind of the beginning of doing an empathy map. But as a group or as individuals, like you'll have links to these Jamboards. You should feel free to continue to build them out. But where I'd like to close is just ask you to think about next, and we'll go back to our slides in a moment. How many of these things, looking at this Jamboard, actually are things that affected their employees or can be affected by their employees? So think about that. We're going to go back to our slides. For me, the deepest of the empathy questions is really what keeps people up at night? What are their fears? What are their anxieties? What are the things that really hit them every day and kind of make their life less good than they want it to be, right? So making payroll, that is something that actually employees affect a great deal, and their employers can also be, very anxious about. As we talked about, turnover is a huge cause of anxiety for employers, especially these days. Turnover has a lot of impacts. It impacts direct costs, the cost of hiring a new person and training up a new person. But there's also a loss of capacity. It takes a very long time in some jobs for a new person to be able to fill the same experience of the person they've replaced. And the loss of kind of tacit knowledge and kind of the community, like we care about each other in a workplace. And when people move on like that, that causes pain to others in the organization. Commitment to the organization is one that didn't come up on the Jamboard, but I would highlight people who are really committed mean a great deal for their organization. And when they, if you lose someone like that, then that can really hurt. Employee engagement is something that is highly measurable and has huge impacts on organizations. And the more turnover you have, the lower your employee engagement is going to be. We've talked about burnout a lot. Everyone is super canny about burnout now because of the pandemic. But burnout is a huge cost of increased healthcare costs for companies. People even influence revenue and growth, right? Like I said, like if a company comes to you and they need to fill 20 CNA positions, that's because they have a revenue opportunity for what those CNA positions will accomplish. It affects their future growth if they can't hire enough people. And a lot of companies are really growing more attentive to that now. And finally, conflict, right? Conflict didn't come up that much, but it's something that employers worry about a great deal. The more conflict in your business, in most cases, the harder it is going to be to run your business successfully. So all of these are things that employee voice is going to have insight into. And so in thinking about how you engage employers, there are ways that you can bring that employee experience to them that can help them solve the pains associated with these problems. And that kind of is the ultimate message that I would want to share with you from this part of the workshop is employee voice can help you engage employers, but you have to be willing to talk to them about this stuff. It can't just stay on the level of, how many people do you need to fill X role? There has to be a deeper kind of conversation. And so to close, I just want to share a little bit about how we think about the scripts we create with employers. Because, when we work with employers, there's always this conversation, the script that we go through. And so just think about things you might be able to do to deepen your relationship with employers so you can start addressing employee voice with them. So 4 ideas, like if you tend to wait for employers to come to you, which most of us are not doing anymore because it's just such a tricky labor market now, do instead proactively reach out to them and try to figure out what they're struggling with. If you select their business partners based on just what they're telling you about their need for workers, I would actually suggest looking at their reputation locally as a quality employer. And if you're concerned about that from kind of a WIOA standpoint, the recent training and education guidance letter from the Department of Labor, dated July 22nd, provides a lot of backup on that issue. And I would recommend taking a look at it. When you're meeting with employers, if you're asking them mostly about training and recruitment, you should, but also expand that. Ask them about what's happening with their current workforce. Ask them, are they struggling with burnout? Are they struggling with turnover? Are there ways that you could help them address it? And similarly, if you're helping them mostly on the recruitment and training side, ask them about worker voice. Ask them what they know about what their employees are saying about what it's like to work there. And if you could help them discover more, because you, as a third party, as a trusted partner, will often have the ability to learn things that they can't. And that's a real kind of core benefit of doing this work in workforce development. So to close this out, I will pass it back to Carrie.
Oh, I thought I was on mute this whole time. Good thing I wasn't making a lot of noise or burping or something. Thanks all for being here. I have this slide to just capture some reflections and takeaways. And these are really just prompts to get you started to talk with your teams. It really depends on where you are in terms of what kind of where you are with your relationships with your employer partners right now. Like maybe for some of you on this call, you already are thinking of some employers where you've had conversations like this, where they trust you, where they're ready to work together with you on kind of figuring out some strategies to use worker voice and capture deeper insights about what their employees need. For others of you, you may be thinking oh, wow, we have a lot to do in our end of the shop, in our own house to get better at this, which would not be surprising. There's a lot of work that we can all do internally in our own programs and organizations.